Hello, viewers. I'm Vibhuti Jha. This is Jaipur Dialogue USA. And just as always, I will request you welcome to the show and please give your feedback, like and subscribe to the channel and ask your questions. Today, I wanted to talk to you about the Indus Water Treaty, which has gained significant prominence following the tragic killing of Hindu Indians in Pahalgam. So, India did put Indus Water Treaty in abeyance. And sometimes, every incident, every event has its own impact and implication. This one is a very interesting implications for both India and Pakistan. The Indus Water Treaty put in abeyance. If you have followed the news recently, Ajay Banga, the Indian name, of course, the president of World Bank openly said that India cannot unilaterally put Indus Water Treaty, abrogate it or whatever. It cannot act alone. To talk about this matter, what are the truth, what are the lies, what is the need for this agreement, and what is the relevance of it? Everything has to change. I have great pleasure in welcoming Venus Upadhyay ji, who is a scholar,
Thank you.
journalist, and she writes very frequently on Indian matters and geopolitical elements affecting India and how must India respond to that. So, Vinasji, you recently wrote an article on May 1st, following the attack, and you talked about the entire effectiveness of the treaty and the redundancy of the treaty. And that smacks straight into the face of Mr. Ajay Banga, the World Bank president, that this treaty itself is redundant and it's no longer effective. Share your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it's like the tragic incident of Pahalgam. It kind of highlighted the Indus Water Treaty. But the fact is that a lot of discussion on the redundancy of the Indus Water Treaty has already been happening. And I got into it and I started to study it. Also, because I'm a journalist and I was traveling in these regions in September last year, because of the heightened terrorist attacks in some of these regions. So, on assignment, I was traveling through these regions. Otherwise, also, there were certain other factors because of which I was inclined to study the Indus Water Treaty because I'm a native of Jammu and Kashmir. And there were certain aspects of it which were impacting my own life. So it so started that to understand how it's impacting my own personal life, for example, dams being built, or, so we were actually anticipating a dam being built on Uj. So Uj is a distributary of the Ravi River, and we were expecting a dam to be built on Uj. So it has been a discussion in our living rooms for quite some time, for many years now, as to when the dam would be built. And if the dam is built, what's going to be its impact on our lives? So these were the aspects which were being talked about in our living rooms for quite some time. And so I was actually trying to study it. Now, what happened is after the third tenure of Modi government started, there was a concurrent increase in attacks, terrorist attacks in the Kathua district. If you remember, there was an attack on a bus of pilgrims in Riyasi. And that was again another very tragic attack, if you remember. And that happened almost at the same time that the swearing in ceremony was happening. So, so I was trying to understand, all these things. And then I realized that all these factors are basically very much interlinked. In fact, the border itself is linked to the Indus River basin. So, to understand the Indus Water Treaty, we basically need to understand the Indus River basin. The Indus River basin is basically a cross country, it's a cross national river basin. It's massive, it's the basin of the Indus River, its tributaries and distributaries extending right from Tibet, then Jammu and Kashmir, Punjab, almost the entire of Pakistan and eastern Afghanistan. So it's that big, involving so many different countries. And today it impacts about 300 million people across all these nations. So But there are many things, for example, people living on the border areas, they themselves do not know as to how the Indus River Treaty or the Indus River impacts their lives. For example, I grew up, my paternal village, from the rooftop, we would look at a river. We would look at its shimmering water, the beautiful forest around, but never in my life I knew that it is a distributary of the Indus. And so, therefore, along with it, whatever politics, whatever geopolitics, whatever realistic impact it has on our lives, for example, how it has irrigated my ancestors' farms, what are the changes that have happened to the point now? What are the problems that we are facing is actually directly linked to it. So these are the many factors, which caused me to actually look into the Indus River Treaty. And before the Pahalgam attack happened, I had already written an article where I had mentioned that we should relook into the Indus River Treaty because the parameters that defined the treaty in 1960 when it was signed between Jawaharlal Nehru and Ayub Khan, they're very different from what we have today. For example, a basic, very simple fact: you look at Pakistan's population; it was about 45 million at that point of time. Today, it is over 200 million. You look at India's population; it was about 450 million in 1960. Today, it is 1.4 billion. And you look at the condition of the rivers, you look at their flow, you look at their hydrogeological factors. And hydrogeology is not just that the river and the water that flows into the river. It involves a whole lot of many other factors, including the underground water table as well. And you'll be surprised to know that many of these scientific aspects of hydrogeology are actually not a part of the Indus Water Treaty. So basically, from 1960 to 2025, in this whole gap, so many changes have happened in the entire basin, including demography, the number of dams we have built, and when the treaty was signed, this factor about how much of hydroelectric power can be generated or how many dams would be built, even this was not considered. So obviously the treaty as of today, in today's context, in very scientific and practical terms, is redundant.
That's a very emphatic statement. You establish the redundancy of an age old agreement, like as the saying goes, parivartan hona chahiye, according to the time and whatever is required at that moment in time. But this was a very important observation that the population itself has exploded from 45 million from Pakistanis to 240 million to India's 440 to 1.4. So, how does that impact, considering the fact that drinking water, water scarcity, climate change, these issues have come into conversation which did not exist then? So,
Yes.
taking into account those elements, how do you find Ajay Banga, the World Bank president, talking about very emphatically that India cannot unilaterally do this? Tell me something, your
I
thoughts on
think
that. And for the viewers,
I think
purposes,
Mr.
I want
Yeah,
to
yeah. I think Mr.
yeah.
Banga is more or less making a geopolitical statement. He's making a political statement, and it won't take much of an effort for any person, even a lay person, to just Google search. The difference in the parameters of, say, urbanization in the Indus River Basin, or just look at the difference or how the glaciers have melted. The Indus River Basin glaciers have melted, or how different kind of natural disasters are happening because of the melting of the glaciers, or because of various other factors, or just look into how the hydrogeology of the Indus River Basin has changed. In fact, in 2015, and that's a decade, old study that NASA had done, it showed that even the water table, the groundwater table in this river basin, it is not in a very good condition. It is depleting. But the point is that we do not have ways and means to basically monitor it. A river's basin. And the very fascinating thing is, another thing which has always fascinated me is that civilization, people say that civilization has developed on the banks of the river. But actually, civilizations have grown and developed, history has grown and developed in river basins, because it's not just the rivers, it's the fertile soil that the rivers bring along. The basin is basically all about the fertile soil of the rivers and their tributaries and the distributaries and how they interlink. The society is all about that, because rivers are also a very important means of navigation. And for those of us, very what to say, articulate in or very knowledgeable in modern society ways, we may think that, okay, now these days we are not actually using rivers for navigation. But that's not the case when it comes to geopolitical things and national security things, particularly border related things. Particularly if you look at the rivers in the international border, whether it is Punjab or whether it is Jammu, you know rivers are an issue of national security, because all our rivers are going to Pakistan. So, what does this mean? It means that our borders are very porous. So, now these are not peaceful borders, right? These are, in a way, we can't say, I won't say the international border is a conflicted border, but these are not peaceful borders. These are highly militarized borders. You have, cross border firing happening at any time. So rivers are used for infiltration. Now and then, you hear about militants or terrorists infiltrating through the Samba border, Hiranagar border, this stretch of the Kathua border, that stretch of the Kathua border. How is it happening? It is happening through the floodplains of the rivers, because rivers in these stretches, they are not like the perennial rivers. So, again, now that's again an aspect of the cognitive geography, which is again a very important aspect of national security. And that's where I'm saying that we need to understand Indus River Basin from multiple perspectives. So Indus River Basin basically has two set of rivers, the western rivers and the eastern rivers. So the lower rug of the rivers, the three rivers, so the upper rivers, which are in the Srinagar side, you have the Indus, you have the Jhelum, and you have another one, I think that's Chenab. And then you have Ravi, and there are two more rivers, which are a different set of rivers. Now, in their entire composition, they are very different. Because if you look at the stream of Indus, like if you have ever been to Ladakh or if you have been to Srinagar, Kashmir, and you look at the Indus River that flows through, you will see that there is water throughout the year in that. You know, but if you look at the rivers, the tributaries, distributaries of the Indus River Basin in Kathua district, they get flooded only during the monsoon seasons. For example, if you look at Tavi River, which flows through Jammu, you will see that there is a flood warning only during monsoon times. Otherwise, there are three bridges on the Tavi River in Jammu city, and people flying through it would know that always there is a little stream of water, and then there is a massive floodplain with sand and pebbles on it. So, what does this mean? That means that these streams are commutable. Now, in cities, where these bridges and infrastructure, it secures the river. But in other areas, like suppose in Samba, Hiranagar, which are forested or where there is less urbanization, then they provide a very easy commute. So, rivers in these regions are a part of they are a part of a cognitive geography. They are a part of our national security. So, from those aspects, also, it becomes very important for us to re-look into it, because even the terrorism and the way infiltration has been happening through the border stretches. For example, the way narcotics is happening, or the this narco terrorism is happening. Now, narco terrorism is again if you look at the terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir, narco terrorism is very important aspect of it, and it happens all through the border, and the border is all about a river's basin. That's a very important aspect to understand. So obviously, it's India's right as a sovereign nation to basically demand that its national security aspects of the massive Indus River basin, because a natural geography does not consider the political boundaries. For example, the groundwater is not going to consider where our border was drawn. You cannot divide the groundwater. Maybe rivers can still be divided to some extent, but you cannot divide the groundwater. So there are many aspects of it. That's why I said that probably Mr. Banga is more or less making a political and a geopolitical statement. There is no scientific basis to it, and there are ample studies online which can prove this. I cannot hear you. I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
Thank you very much. But you brought in a very relevant and critical question of something of terrorism, which definitely was not in play when this Indus Water Treaty was signed. And that clearly alters the entire landscape if the river basin and all the elements that you mentioned just now in a very eloquent way. So, how does India deal with that? Does obviously the treaty doesn't provide for the extraordinary situation of terrorism. Today's circumstances, how can India make use of this its national security concerns, which is completely responsible from Pakistan's side? How can India take advantage of this ugly shift in Pakistan policy towards India to use the national security concern and terrorism towards amending, obeying, putting the treaty in abeyance, or completely having a new treaty agreement, water sharing agreement? Can India have the legal standard to enforce that on Pakistan or make it as an issue?
Uh, First, before I answer your question, I also want to mention a little thing here. In 2018, India built a border fence. You know, Now this border fence was not built on the zero border line. Like you see on the Wagah border, you see a white line, and then people stand over there and say, "Okay, my hand is in Pakistan and I'm standing in India." People say stuff like that. So that line is the zero border, but the fence that India has drawn, it is not drawn on the zero border. It is drawn like 5 kilometers to 20 kilometers inside. And like I have witnessed it. Now, why it is done? Now, there is a context to the Indus Water Treaty to it. Obviously, there's a national security concern. There are strategic reasons to it of why India has done that. And this was built basically to prevent infiltration and smuggling and all kind of things were happening. The modus operandi before this fence was there was very different than what the way things changed after the fence was made. But why I mentioned this in context of Indus Water Treaty is because all along this fence, whether it is international border or the LOC, you have different stretches where cross-border shelling happens. Like it happened this time also, after May 7, when India, stuck at the terrorist sites inside Pakistan, a lot of border shelling happened, in some prominent regions like Punch, and then it happened in some places in IB also. Now, India, to protect its citizens, border residents, in the border fence came up in 2003. Sorry, I was wrong in that date. In 2018, the Indian government gave a massive sum of money to build bunkers for people, for border residents, for their protection. So 3.5 lakh rupees for individual bunkers. That means that families were living in isolation within farms, very far away. They were given an individual bunker. And when people were living in a neighborhood, like a cluster of homes, they were given a community bunker and they were paid like 10.5 lakh rupees for it. And I made a visit, studying some of these areas. And at that time, some cross-border shelling was happening in Rajour area during Diwali time. And I visited these places a couple of years ago. And I saw that the bunkers were filled with water at many places. It was so ironic and so pathetic. And how, in reality, what it does, until and unless you go to these places, you can never understand it. Because I met a couple, they were an old couple. They had a child, not a child basically, but a son, 40 plus year old son, who had cerebral palsy. So he was completely bedridden and he was always on the bed. And so when cross border shelling happened, they had an individual bunker, which was about 20 meters from their door. So when cross border shelling happened, they had to run for their lives. They had to lift the entire bed, those folding beds of the son to take him also into the bunker. And the bunker was full of water. So, now India has the right to question, the whatever the democracy watchdogs of the world or the law upholders of the world. Don't we have the right to protect our citizens? Why is water over there? Because there is water table. There is rain coming. All kind of things are happening. There are bunkers even for schools. So don't we have the right to take decisions in the interest of our people? So that's why I'm saying, when we say in this water treaty on paper, we can make it sound very, like, but in reality, there are many nuances to it. How it impacts people's life, how it impacts their agriculture, their economy, how economy in turn impacts, livelihood, aspirations, how it leads to problems within the society, including crime, including terrorism. All these things are interlinked. So I think the first and the most important thing for India to do is to first understand what it is facing. It is not just facing Indus River Basin or its crisis or its realism within its boundary. It is facing the crisis of an entire cross national Indus River Basin because the basin is one. You cannot divide the basin through a political boundary. So, first, India has to understand the the uniqueness of this reality, and India needs to have a relook into its into the into the aspects of the treaty. I would say India has to have a new national security perspective of the Indus River Basin and the Indus River Treaty. So first, let's have a widened perspective of the Indus River Basin, understand it on our own terms, in context of our reality, in context of our complex borders, in context of the national security imperatives and the crisis that we face, in context of the economy, the demographies, changing demographies, the climate change perspectives that are coming up. And climate change is just not the perspectives these days. Climate change is a whole lot of diplomacy. It's a whole lot of diplomacy on the multilateral forums. So it's high time. And I think tragically, Pahalgam happened. I wish there was some other normal reason that would have pushed us to, work on the Indus River Treaty. But since now this tragedy has happened, I hope that, and now I think we also have the space, we have the public support within our country. So I think we should really minutely look into the Indus River Treaty in context of the contemporary imperatives of the Indus River Basin.
Thank you very much for such a wonderful articulation of the problem that exists in the changed circumstances. And I totally agree with you. As a student of economics and international banking, I do know one thing. Treaties have relevance with reference to their time and period. And after that, it has to be relooked, renegotiated, and new imperatives have to be taken into account. Considering that you talked about the economic aspect of it, the population explosion that has happened, the need for climate change, the basin, what are the challenges with reference to infrastructure development in that? So if the bunker has water, that means it's virtually ineffective. It doesn't serve the purpose, right? So the question arises, what is the government of India doing and what must the government of India do now in the current situation for infra development in that region and area?
So I think since we have suspended our participation in the treaty, I think a very simple thing that we can do is, and that I have mentioned in my article also, that we should do an audit of the bunkers that we have built, old bunkers and new bunkers. Earlier also there were some bunkers. I have seen some of these bunkers. Now, many times, I'm not saying that all the time the water is there, but sometimes the living conditions are very bad. The floor is very moist because obviously the bunker has to be inside the earth. It is 10 feet inside the earth, and this is a massive river basin. These are alluvial plains. When I say alluvial plains, I mean these are very fertile lands. If you look at this stretch of Kathua, Araspura, Hiranagar, border areas, all these stretches of the border grow basmati crop, paddy cultivation. So those who are into agriculture would know that paddy needs a lot of water.
Yeah.
These are very, simple. You don't need to be very knowledgeable to basically understand. These are very common sense things. you know Plus, I think there are other aspects also to it. For example, there are many glaciers which are feeding the entire Indus River basin, right? So there is the upper stretch of the Indus River basin. A lot of it is in Pakistan, and a lot of this upper stretch is actually fed by glaciers in the high Asia region. By high Asia region, I mean the regions like Hunza, Skardu, and these kind of whatever areas. So there are reports which, and I mentioned in my article, that over 50% of the water flow in the upper segment of the Indus, it comes from these glaciers, which are already under Pakistan's control. And you can find a lot of studies, even by Pakistani scholars, which are basically talking about the alarming, whatever melting of these glaciers that is happening, and how that is responsible for various disasters in the Pakistani control regions. So I think anybody who says that Indus River Treaty should be the way it has been since 1960, I think we have lost, track of our scientific aptitude. That is all I can say. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's very open. Just go into it. Even after Pahalgam, there were some reports which have come up, which talk about the unscientific nature of the Indus River Treaty.
Hmm. No, it's very important. I always say that you mentioned that it's tragic that the whole thing came up post Pahalgam, and that this
Yes.
particular thing was, known earlier on as well. It's not that the government of India did not know about it, or people did not know. Scientific researches go on. The issue here is very
Yeah.
important. Every disaster brings about an opportunity. I always say that. Every disaster offers an opportunity. The question is whether we grab that or we let it pass. So, I call it a two collateral advantages of this. Sadly, I'm not saying advantage as an advantage. Two
Mm-hmm.
very sad
Mm-hmm.
realizations that have happened is, or awareness that has happened is, the relevance of Indus Water Treaty is no longer relevant. As we say with
It's not.
respect,
It's
nobody knew the word
Yeah.
climate
Yeah.
change in 1960. You do not have envisaged that.
Yeah.
You did not envisage the
Yeah. Yeah.
population explosion. You did not envisage that
Yeah.
Pakistan would become such a terrorist nation. So it has become a security
Yeah.
concern. So
Yeah.
India has correctly gone to review that. The other element is the point 0.5 element of Indian society that General Rawat had mentioned. Those people have also got exposed quite thoroughly. But in a democracy,
Mm.
things move slow. Things take their time because everybody has a right to sue the government and take matters to Supreme Court straight away. Even terrorists do that.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about
Mm-hmm.
your journalistic experience part of it. What are the odds that India will have to overcome going forward in achieving its stated country goals of security, economic affairs, and managing their own treaty agreements? To what extent can we really do the revision in the treaty?
I think India should understand that India's own situation context as a global power is not what it was when the treaty was signed. whether it is Indus River Treaty or any other old treaties that we were a part of. Now, in 2025, India is exactly 25 years away from the mid-century. This year, we are going to be the the third the fourth leading economic power, right?
We already
And
are.
we are soon. Yeah, there's some people who say, like a couple of days ago,
Yeah.
that we have already become the fourth
Third, third,
largest
third.
economy
We
of
are
the
not
world.
looking at the third part. Yes, yes, yes.
But
Yes.
there were estimates basically that we will become in 2025, we will become the fourth largest economy of the world. And
Correct.
then very soon, we are expected to be the third largest economy of the world, which means that after US and China, it is India. And then you look at other economies, the interesting aspect is that there's a huge gap between this first, second, and third, and between the third and the rest of them. So now this is India's entry into, India's new entry into the global arena of leadership. So obviously now not everybody is going to be liking or supporting India's rise. Obviously, nobody would be supporting India's rise, right? We are going to be facing new challenges in context of our economic rise, in context of our geopolitical rise, in context of our growing assertiveness, that obviously we need to be assertive when we are growing. So I think in that context, treaties would just become tools to check our assertiveness, to check our resilience, to check our willpower, to check our political willpower. So I think India should be ready, on a path of growth ahead in the next 25 years until the mid-century. We're going to be facing a lot of challenges, and particularly a lot of challenges to our national security. And treaties like the Indus Water Treaty must be today urgently looked renewed in context of India's national security. And I think
Very
all
well.
other treaties as well. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely correct. And because the change in dynamics have definitely brought about various elements in the geopolitical arena that do not want India to become what India aspires to become. So the obstacles are
Yes.
plentiful. One of the things which I always say that part of the our tradition of Shatru Bodh and Purva Paksh, as I always
Hmm.
say that to understand, to understand dharma, you have to understand Shatru Bodh. You have to acknowledge the truth very seriously and very sincerely. And I am a
Hmm.
believer that India must acknowledge the reality, the ugly truth, the sad truth that Pakistan and China don't mean well to India. They will do whatever it
Yes.
takes to disrupt India's march towards 2047. Prime Minister Modi has already talked about. And you can see what is happening in
Definitely.
Bangladesh. You can see what Pakistan is doing. You can see what Mr. Trump said, brought about the equivalence between India and Pakistan again. So, given these scenario, in the last few minutes of our conversation today, I wanted to talk
Hmm.
to you about Prime Minister's doctrine. Trust and terrorism cannot go together. Water and blood cannot go together. Terror and talks cannot happen
Yes.
together. And now India has already withdrawn from
Yes.
the Asia Cup cricket match also. You cannot have this kind of a
Yes.
scenario where we let you make money
Hmm.
and you use that money against me. So, how do you see
Yes.
India keeping up with a very volatile situation around its border?
Yeah. I think again, I'm saying that the context is very different. For example, if you look at the six rivers of the Indus Water Treaty, Beas, Ravi, and Satluj, the eastern rivers, or you look at the western rivers, the upper Indus, Chenab, or Jhelum, you know, I mean, I think like rivers should also be mapped, in a new way in context of the economic resurgence that we want to design for the region, the vision that we have for the region. And in that context, terrorism and all the other like narcotics, narco-terrorism, terrorism, everything should be seen in that context of our economic rise. Because eventually both Pakistan and China are going to be using Kashmir to basically keep checking India's pulse.
Right.
They're going to be using the geopolitical theater of Kashmir to basically create more challenges for India, to keep on checking India, to keep on checking India's rise. So I think in the past few years, Modi government's policies in Kashmir were very visionary in that context. They were aligned with India's overall rise because a more assertive India would obviously be more assertive in Kashmir. So in that way, I personally see what to say. I personally see a newness through all our policies. I hope I'm able to make my point clearer here, and I hope I have answered your question. Because I think another thing which concerns me is about the Indus River Basin is that in 1960, when it was signed, uh, even the Trans-Karakoram Tract, which then Pakistan gave to China, which is also actually a source of many glaciers, the treaty was signed before it. So it was after the treaty was signed that a new era of Pakistan and China relationship started. Today, if you look at the entire Indus River Basin, this is a very unpeaceful region. Look at Afghanistan, look at Pakistan, look at Jammu Kashmir, look at Punjab, look at the situation in Tibet. And out of all these regions, it is only India, which is a functional, successful democracy on its way to become a major global power. So obviously, when there is a country sitting, democratically, when it is growing in that way in a particular region, which is surrounded by, you know, these kind of entities, it will certainly be tested over there. So I think Indus River Treaty in itself is going to be a very big geopolitical tester for India in the times to come. So I think it's the right time. Tragically, it happened through Pahalgam, but it has happened at the right time and we should relook into it. In one of my articles, I had also suggested that we should basically create a river basin, some kind of an institution or some kind of a body which particularly focuses only on the border region, because the border itself is all about the river basin. Conflict is about the river basin, to be very true. If we deeply go into it, we will see that the entire conflict in this region is about the river basin. And the divisions, the political boundaries were deliberately drawn to basically keep the conflicts alive. So I think it's high time that if India wants to be a leader, and if India, obviously, if India is a leader in this region, then India will be challenged in this front.
Very, very, very poignant observation that India will have to stand up and challenge the contentions of that area, given the scenario. My last question of the day, and that is because you are a journalist and you talked about India's rise to power, and is the narrative thing, my favorite word. And that has bearing on my own coming to America in 1991 April, when I was supposed to market India, not supposed to, it was my responsibility as a banker, international banker, to market India's liberalization program and attract investments in India. And I realized at that time we had no story, we had no narrative of
Mm,
our.
yes.
Again, this particular reference has come about, and I have been consistently, I'm very proud to say that rewriting India's narrative to the American corporate world. I'm talking about now, 2025, post Pahalgam. Again, the thing is that we trounced, we beat the hell out of Pakistan in this war, in Operation Sindoor. We laid down a doctrine of our own. Yet, India seems to have lost. People are talking about it. The narrative war. So, how does India build the narrative of as a superpower? I call India a superpower now. How does India build the superpower, the narrative, given the entire world seems to be against India. That's the important part.
I think
Who are our allies?
I think first of all, the perspective that India has lost the narrative war is
Is it
itself a
wrong?
faulty narrative. That that itself is a narrative. Come on. I mean, that itself is a
Exactly.
narrative.
Exactly. Yeah.
On what basis? What is the rational, logical, source-based analysis, in-depth
Yes.
analysis of that whether India has lost the narrative war? That itself
That's
is
a
a narrative. So I think
that's a good question. That's a
what
good
is
question.
important,
Yes.
yeah, what is important here is how informed are our domestic ecosystems in both the countries. When Pakistan plays a certain narrative or a certain story of its victory, to whom it is playing? Is it informed audiences or is it gullible audiences? What is the political stance behind it? And the same is about India. How did India conduct itself? How did India conduct its story? How is Pakistan conducting its story? Now, for example, Portugal, there was a news today morning that the Indian embassy had, there were Pakistani protesters outside the Indian embassy, and they put up this, big banner saying that the Operation Sindoor is still continuing, right? Now, if you analyze it, you compare it with the Indian protesters outside an embassy, I think that was outside UK, and there was a Pakistani military attaché who made some very derogatory gestures while drinking a cup of tea, made some very derogatory gestures towards the protesters. You compare it with the conduct of the Indian staff. You look at those pictures. I think you can get those pictures. They were all over the news today, how India dealt with it. And I think India's news briefings on Operation Sindoor, I think the name itself, Operation Sindoor, was a genius, was a genius strategy, right? I mean, how? Just let's understand, how was it a genius strategy? First of all, it was very, very appropriate to a context. Why? Because there were 26 women, you know, who lost their men. So obviously the Sindoor was in that context. In addition to that, it also talked about Indian culture. It talked about our ethos. It talked about our emotions. It talked about what we are, as people and what we believe in. So if the militants or the terrorists, the terrorists, they checked the religious identity of the people. The checking the religious identity was itself creating a narrative, right? When somebody comes to you and asks you, that whether you are a Hindu and then kills you, and then it runs through the entire global media, it is creating a narrative. Or when there is a terrorist who kills a husband and the wife says kill me also, and then he says no, I will not kill you, go and tell Modi, that is creating a narrative. And when Modi comes back and names it Operation Sindoor, he's countering that narrative brilliantly. The point is that we haven't analyzed it that way. And so everybody is saying in the news it is that India has lost the narrative war. Are Baba, who said India has lost the narrative war? You haven't even analyzed it from scientific perspective or logical perspective. Who said? One or two experts, saying that this didn't happen, that didn't happen. Does it mean we actually lose the narrative war? We didn't even look at other perspectives. We didn't even analyze how we, countered the massive, violent narrative that was inflicted on us. I think we have done very well. The only need is that we need to believe in ourselves. We need to restudy it. We need to realign ourselves. I think we are there, and we need to keep asserting ourselves more emphatically.
I love the use of word assertiveness. I have always been saying, and some people quote me that I take the help of Swami Vivekananda's statement, invoking Hindus to arise, awaken, and assert. And
Yes,
finally,
assert.
India is doing it. Finally, we have become arisen, awaken, and assertive, to which I add my fourth A, most humbly, act. Because if you do not act
Yes.
on any of these, then your all the knowledge,
Yeah.
wisdom, information, it doesn't matter. So I'm very glad as a journalist you are putting the things in place. And I will say this also.
There
I mean,
is,
just one thing that I will say this, then you come in, and then we'll close the show.
yeah,
What I want to
yeah,
say is
yeah.
that you and I understand who won, who lost, who gained, who lost. We know who lied and who was on the path of dharma and who is part of adharma. We all understand that. We understand that. But there is a huge amount of 80-20 ratio. If you take that and move forward, the 80% people are relying upon traditional media or the Western media,
Hmm.
as the saying goes. Where is our narrative? Where is our BBC? Where is our Voice of America? Where is our Al Jazeera to tell the world, here it is, this is what happened, verify it? And we have the proof of verification, which is why Prime Minister is sending virtually an all party political leadership to go and talk about it. That's the element that I'm talking about. The Western interests manage their narrative through their media, and we have to counter it. Your last word, and then we'll close today.
Yeah, yeah. When the Pahalgam thing happened and the first report of it came, I saw that it was written from South Korea, New York Times report, because it was the night time in your part of the world. So
Yeah.
they would be having a morning desk, and the morning desk was in South Korea. So immediate report was written by somebody in South Korea. Now that's a part of the news operations, a part of the global news operations. That's how the global news agencies work. There's a breaking news. You just need to put it there, for the audiences. That's how the clickbait works. But look at how much of knowledge that person would have. Somebody sitting in South Korea, how much of knowledge, practical, realistic knowledge, that journalist would have about the actual happenings in Jammu and Kashmir. But the good thing is today we have the social media. But then there is a challenge to it also, because it is very difficult to patrol it, to filter it out. So, and we have over 400 million social media users, that the largest community of social media users in the world. So India is in a situation where we have so many opportunities, but then we also have so many challenges. Now it's on us as we move forward, how we pay attention to the little small things that our country needs us from us. As a citizen, if I want to contribute to my country's progress, what is needed from me to work on my own self? How do I prepare my own self to address the things that I will encounter on way to that progress? So that's very important thing. And with that, I would like to end, but I also want to mention one little thing in the Indus River Basin context, because I've forgotten that point. Now, after 2019, when Article 370 was abrogated, a lot of these lands, I'm not talking about the urbanized lands in Jammu and Kashmir, and therefore the urbanized lands in the Indus River Basin. A lot of these forested, far-flung regions, there was no use of the land because the economy was never built up. Please understand that. Why everybody runs after government jobs in Jammu and Kashmir? Because there is no alternative to it, to life security or opportunities for life. So what happened is after 2019, when Article 370 was abrogated and suddenly the entire system changed into the, where federal laws came in, the system changed. So the land value suddenly, became high. Now, with the increase of attacks, there is again anxiety because nobody wants to buy land in these areas, whereas the price of land has increased. So, who will buy the land and who will move out? You are there sitting in US. Suppose you have an ancestral land somewhere in Jammu and Kashmir. You have your life in US. Life in Jammu and Kashmir back is very insecure. You are never going to come back. After your parents pass away, you're going to sell off that land. But to whom are you going to sell the land? Because none from your community is going to stay back. Everybody is moving out. So who is coming to purchase the land? The issue of the Indus River Basin is a very complex issue today for India. And it's high time that we look into it. We've got an opportunity, as again I'm saying for the third time, through the Pahalgam tragedy, and we should not waste it.
Thank you so much, Venusji, for a fascinating conversation. And I hope the viewers will appreciate the points you have used, the opportunities that you have pointed out. And, it is time. Who will buy those lands? That's a very vital question. And with this, I wanted to say to you, thank you very much for coming and bringing the journalistic perspective and your deep research, your personal experience of traveling to those places and reporting it. Keep doing your great job, and we will talk again on
Thank you.
many more issues. And I would want you to come back again to talk again. I always tell my viewers,
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
I always tell my viewers, Satyameva Jayate is our slogan. And for Satya to triumph and Satya to win, you and I will have to stand up just as Venusji did today and told the truth. We have to stand up and talk the truth. Stand up for the truth. Be a stand and not hesitate to say the truth that matters. Thank you very much for watching. God bless. Namaste.
Thank you. Namaste.